do some testing. Let's make sure we can hear you, Grandpa. Tell me a joke.
A joke?
Yeah.
I know what about the high priest.
In church one time it wasn't us, but this happened. Jan's brother-in-law told us this joke. He talked to us on the phone and he told us this joke. He said they was having a church and sacrament meeting, and a baby just kept crying. They didn't want to stop. It's a little boy. And so pretty quick the bishop came down and laid his hands on his head, and the little boy quieted up and went to sleep. And the father asked him, well, what did you do? He says, I ordained him a high priest.
That's a good one. That's great. All right. So to start off, what is your full name, and why did your parents select this name for you? And did you have any nicknames growing up?
My name is Lamar Farr. I'm a twin. I have a twin sister. Her name is Lamel. And back in 1927, when I was born, March the 8th, 1927, why, there was a Lamar flower. And Mother found that on a sack. And so she named me Lamar. And then she did, I don't remember how she came up with Lamel, but anyway, we came up with Lamar with 2 R's and Lamel with 2 L's in her name.
Lamel just flowed nicely with Lamar, so.
Yeah.
Did people call you Lamar growing up?
My what?
Did they call you Lamar growing up?
Yeah. I had a nickname. My father gave me a nickname of Bud. All my family call me Bud. They always have. In fact, most of them still do.
I know.
The ones that are left, anyway.
I know a lot of my second cousins call you Uncle Bud.
Yeah. Yeah, that's what they call me.
So what was it like growing up in St. John's?
Oh, I think it's a typical town, as in that time of year, and the time of the season, and
That's where you're born in St. John's, right?
I was born and raised in St. John's. We lived about a mile from school, and we had to, of course, we had to walk to school. But I learned to work hard because my father owned a farm, and when the time he was big enough to work anyway, why, he'd take us out and we'd help with whatever needed to be done. But mostly we raised alfalfa hay, and he taught us how to learn how to, we'd cut it, then we'd rake it, and then rake it in a windrow, and then later on in life they had a baler that would just run down that windrow and pick the hay up and make a bale out of it. You'd have a man or a person sitting on either side of the end of it, and they could poke wires through it and tie it, and then they'd fall off and just go right on down the road. But before that, we used to have to pick it up in a pitchfork after we baled it, or after we windrowed it. We pick it up in a pit with a pitchfork, put it on a wagon, and haul it to town. And then we'd throw it either in a stack if we was going to bale it, or else we'd just put it in the barn and we'd feed it to the cows. Later on, Dad used to sell it, and he'd sell it to the Indian traders. They'd use it for, the traders would sell it to the Indians, and of course they'd feed it to the livestock. But we'd bring a baler in where it was stacked outside, and it was a stationary baler. We'd just have to throw it, and we'd stand it in the stack and throw it into the baler, and it'd bale it out, and they would stack it out, stack the bales out. But it was, we learned how
It's
to
hard work. When did you start doing that sort of work? How old were you, do you think?
Oh, I was probably about 12 when I really went to work.
Wow. So that was the main source of income for the family, at least at that time.
Yeah.
Was the hay.
My father was killed in an automobile accident when I was 12. So, but he had taught me how to work, and I'm right in the middle of 7 boys. So I got the brunt of it because it worked both ends into the middle anyway. But he taught us how to work, and that's what we had to do. In the spring of the year, while I was going to school, after my father was killed, mother had 9 of us to raise. I had a sister that she's the second one in the family. She passed away in an infant. She was about 14, 15 months old when she passed away. But they lived, my mom and dad, when they were first married, they lived in Hunt, a little ranch area about southwest of St. John's. And they lived there, and that's where my older brother Norman was born, and then Genevieve, the girl, that passed away. And they buried her in Snowflake, because mother was from Snowflake. And so Dad used to ride his horse. He lived in Hunt at the time. He'd ride his horse clear over to Snowflake from Hunt to visit with Mother until they were married. And then, of course, Mother moved over to Hunt. They had a home in Hunt. They lived there for a while until Dad had his, well, he just got fed up with it. The cattle, it would get, in the spring, it would get real muddy, and the cattle would get down in the river. The Little Colorado River went through Hunt. The cattle would get down in the river and get in the bog. Well, if you weren't there to get her out, why, she'd die. And Dad, he just lost so many cattle, he decided to get out, so he moved to St. John's. And that was, of course, way before my time. But that was the situation that brought him into St. John's.
So what was the house like that you grew up in? What do you remember about the house that you grew up in?
Well, it was a small one. Of course, we didn't have bathrooms. We had to go out to the shanty outside, whether it's 20 below or 50 above. When you had to go to the bathroom, you had to go outside. We used to call them two-holers. That had 2 seats inside of the door or the building. Later on, it was Roosevelt was the president, and we used to call them Roosevelt Monuments, because he had a program where they built those outhouses. They had a cement floor, and boy, they were up to date.
So how big was that house? I mean, you had 9 siblings.
Our house, it was 2 bedrooms, 1 big front room, and a kitchen, so there was 2. Now, we boys, we slept out in the granary. It was so probably as far as from here to across the street from the house, and that's where we used to keep our grain. And it was just, what we did is we built a bed on top of the grain bin where they dumped the grain in. Why, we built a bed in there, a double bed, and 2 of us would sleep there, and then the rest would sleep at the house. We just had 3 bedrooms, mother and dad, and the girls had a bedroom, and the boys had one. It was very small, but livable.
Made do.
It was made of adobe's. I wasn't born in that house. I was born across about a block away in another home. I have a picture of that home. Maybe we could show that to you later on.
Yeah, absolutely. Is there a specific event or story about the Farr family, or any stories that have kind of passed down from generations that you can recall?
Oh, not really. My grandfather, Farr, he had a service station down in the middle of St. John's, the town, and it was quite close to the school. And I remember we used to, of course, we had chickens, and Mother let us have eggs, and we'd take those eggs to school. And then during the recess, the school wasn't very far from the service station. We'd take those eggs and trade them in for candy or whatever else. Not very often, but that was one of the pleasures of school anyway.
Back when you could barter for things.
Yeah. But Grandpa, of course, he'd take those eggs and sell them to people. They'd come and get it, you know. They'd come and buy the eggs. They were fresh, and they'd buy single eggs or whatever, and he'd sell quite a few eggs. So he didn't mind us bringing them.
Yeah, so it was a good deal for everyone. What was one of your favorite activities that you would do as a kid before high school?
Before high school?
Yeah.
Well, we'd play football out in the street. When we'd wear the football out, we'd always get a football for Christmas, and we'd wear it out. So the girls had when they were young or older, they'd have a rubber doll, and they were quite big. They was that tall or taller.
Made from the football?
And we'd make a football out of those.
Oh,
And you'd take them, we'd choose up sides. Of course, the neighbors would join in with us. We'd choose up sides, and you could throw that ball, or that baby, or that ball, as far as you could throw it, and somebody could catch it. And it'd whiz as you go by because of the openings we'd take the arms and legs off. Now that was one of the sports, one of the fun times that we had.
That's great.
Especially around Christmas time, because we'd always get a new football, but we'd wear it out pretty quick to where we'd make the girls, or ask the girls, they'd let us have their old dolls, of course.
That's funny. Do you remember any fads from your youth, popular hairstyles and clothes and things like that?
No, I think we just had a regular haircut, and we'd go to the barber shop. They had a barber shop downtown, and we'd go to that, and they'd cut our hair. His name was Thurber, and we always called him Pop Thurber. But he'd cut your hair however you'd like it. But some of them would have flat tops. And I remember your dad. Of course, we'd moved there. We'd moved to Holbrook by then. But he always wanted a flat top, and he'd let it grow quite tall, and then just make a flat top out of it.
Did that one too many times, and it all went away.
Yeah.
So what was school like for you as a child? What were some of the best and worst subjects? What did you like in school?
Oh, I liked quite well, all my subjects. Math was hard for me. I think it is for everybody. In high school, I had he's an older man that was our math teacher, and I always have quite a hard time with it, and the students would give him a hard time. And finally, I don't know what happened, but one day he asked me to go out and help him pick up the hay that had been cut, and it was loose hay, just like I was telling you earlier. And he would be on one side, and I'd be on the other side, and we was picking up the hay, and I just worked his tail off, if you'll pardon the expression. And he liked that, and after that, he liked me. He never gave me any trouble after that in high school until I graduated. Well, ever after that, he bragged about me in the school about how hard a worker Lamar Farr was. And so I made some good points with him.
That's very good. This one's a little different. How is the world different today than what it was like when you were a kid?
It's modernized. I remember an automobile, for instance. I knew everybody's car in St. John's. I could stand on the corner and hear that car coming and tell you whose it was. But they were good old cars. Of course, they weren't as modern as they are nowadays, but they were good solid cars. But I pride myself of being able to tell whoever's car was coming down the street, whoever I was standing by or talking to. They'd say, "Hey, Lamar, whose car is that?" I'd tell them. Of course, not everybody had a car back in those days.
Yeah, that's interesting.
I remember the first time, a little coincidence, Dad, we'd come home and he'd park the car, and maybe on Sunday or something, he'd take us for a ride if we weren't really doing anything after we got out of our meetings. And one day he forgot to gas the car up. So we were talking about the kids, or we kids were kidding him, wanting him to take us for a ride. He says, "Well, we don't have any gas." Well, all of a sudden, Sylvia, or my younger sister, just younger than me, she says, "Oh yeah, Dad." She says, it's about full of gas." "Well, where did you get it?" She put water in the gas tank.
Fill it up.
Of course, he had to drain the gas tank before he could even start the car. We always kidded Sylvia about that. "Oh, we have plenty of gas now."
What about as a teenager? What did you really like doing as a teenager?
I like sports. And when I was going to school, of course, I participated in all of the sports. I think just a regular life. We'd have every Wednesday, they had what they called, family night at the movie. And that's after I remember the first movies they brought into St. John's. That was a long time ago. I don't even remember what year it was. But they would, on Wednesday night, it was home eating, or family night, and Mother would buy a ticket, and it lasted for a month. And so we could all go to the show on Wednesday night. At family night, they'd usually have a pretty good picture, we'd go down and go to the show.
Yeah, how much did that cost? Do you remember?
About 15 cents.
Yeah, times
I
have
think-
changed.
I think about the most I ever paid for a movie was a quarter, 25 cents.
Oh wow.
Even that, regular time, not family night.
Yeah.
But she'd buy us a ticket, so they knew that the Natalia Force family was coming, so we just go in because mother bought the ticket. But just a regular show, why, it cost us a quarter.
All right. We've been told to ask about a little Mexican girl.
Oh, the little Mexican girl.
Let's hear the story.
Well, they lived up above, further up higher, above where we lived, and then every morning she'd go by to work. And, just a typical high, and let it be that. One morning she came by and she had makeup. Oh boy, lipstick and hair covering, and her hair was fixed real nice. And she came by. I says, "Hello, Painted Desert." And she says, "Who buy this paint? I'd like to ask your business." And I sucked my dog on her. That dog knocked her down. And I, of course, went out and took him off, jumped him off. And she got up and called me every name in Spanish that she could think of, and cussed me out. And she said, "I'm going to go tell the sheriff on you." And she was headed for where the courthouse was, where the sheriff would be. And I just assumed she was going to do that. So Gus was with me, my younger brother. And so we went down and was talking. I mentioned earlier about this bin where we put the grain.
Mm-hmm.
We dug ourselves in that bin and stayed there all day long, waiting for that sheriff to show up.
That's funny. Well, apparently he never showed up, or you couldn't find you anyway.
He never showed up.
That's funny. That's a good one. All right, so that was kind of the growing up section before we kind of move on. Is there anything else about your childhood that we didn't cover?
Oh dear. I played all the sports, football and basketball. We didn't play baseball. We had track,
Yeah.
but football, basketball, and track is all the sports, and I participated in all of those. Of course, I wasn't the best, but I thought I was probably about mediocre. But I had lots of fun with it.
That's good.
One year we went to the state tournament in basketball, and we'd go to Flagstaff to play. That's where they had the tournament. And we were sleeping in the dormitories, which was right next to the gymnasium. And we gone to bed, and I don't know what woke me up, but something woke me up in the middle of the night, and I looked out the window, and the gymnasium was on fire. And so I jumped out of bed and ran down to my coach and told him, and he got a hold of the fire department, and they put it out. It didn't do hardly any damage, but I have a letter in my file where the college wrote me a real nice thank you letter for saving that
Being a
gymnasium.
gym. That's the least they could do. That's great. Jane, you were saying something.
That's what I was going to be
Oh,
the fire.
The fire story. All right, well, let's keep going. So what do you remember most about your mother, and what was the most important thing that she taught you?
be honest. And she really emphasized religion. I mean the Mormon church. And we had a testimony as we were growing up. It became stronger. And but she emphasized that, and of course, see, Dad was killed, and I mentioned when I was 12, so she had quite a struggle, and we'd try to get enough to help her by, I started to tell you earlier, in the spring of the year, I would plow. I'd get the team of horses and the old hand plow that you'd follow the team and hold the hand plow, and we'd plow people's garden spots. Everybody in St. John's had a pretty big garden spot, and we'd plow that in the spring of the year and harrow it and set it up so that they could plant their garden in it. And we'd make pretty good money on it. We'd sometimes $10-12 for the job, and the people were willing to pay it. So, you know, we'd take it, and of course we'd turn that into Mother, help her with food and so on. I think an interesting story here I need to bring up. One year, Mother would always order Christmas out of the catalog, Monkey Ward or whatever, Montgomery Ward or whatever, and she would send it off and order the things that she wanted us to have. Well, the package came one year, and Mother didn't have enough money to get that package out. It came COD. She didn't have money to get that package out of the post office, and she was really worried about it, really fussing. And it's coming close to Christmas, and she needed to get it out. Gus was real close with me. He's 4 years younger than I am, but we were real close, and he just tagged me wherever we went. But he and I decided to see if we could help Mother to get the money to get that package out. And so we prayed about it. Gus and I knelt down and prayed about that we could find Mother enough money for Mother to get that package out. And then we headed for the grocery store. And we had an old grocer. He was just good as gold, and he'd let Mother have things on credit until she could pay for it. And we were going to go down and talk to him and see if he'd lend us some money to get that package out. And it's about $75 is what it was. Well, we had prayed about that. We were going down the hill. It was about a mile to school. We had to kind of go downhill. And we walked down, and about, maybe 2 blocks from the school, we turned the corner, and there, laying in the bushes, or on the ground there, was a wallet. And that had exactly this amount of money that Mother had to have to open that to get that package out. And of course, we got it and took it home and gave it to her. Lamel swears that it was in Dad's billfold. She figured that some way, that the Lord would help Dad get that down to Mother so she could open that package, get that package out. But that was the story that, Gus and I always remembered. Nelda had a copy of that. Gus's wife, she has a copy of that letter, or that story. So that was a real inspiration to me, the testimony of what prayer will do. And I'll always remember that. I can take you to the very spot that we picked that up to the day.
We've talked a little bit about your dad, but what about your dad? What do you remember most about him, and what were the lessons he taught
Dad was probably the best liked man in St. John's. Everybody. The Mexicans loved him.
you?
When we had his funeral, it was the largest funeral they'd ever had in St. John's at the time. And there was quite a few Spanish people there. It's a Spanish, he liked the Spanish. We had an old man, his name was Rafael Nuenas, and he would come in every fall because we raised pigs, always had a pig to kill in the fall, and he would come over and kill that pig. Of course, we boys would help him, you know. It's quite a chore. You know, you have to scrape the hair off of the pig. You've probably never seen any of that, but we'd help him do that. He'd cut the head off, and then we'd duck it down in the hot water, then pull it out on a table and pull all the hair off. And it was quite a chore. But he would do that for the head. And then he'd take the head home and make head cheese. And it was good. But that's the pay that he would get for killing that pig for us.
Sounds gross.
He'd let us take turns shooting the pig in the head with a 22.
The boys like to do. Was there a specific lesson that your father taught you?
Oh, heavens, he taught us everything that he could do out in the farm. And he taught us to always be honest. And Dad, they didn't have work around in St. John's, and so he would go out on go out on the reservation and the railroad, and he'd work there all week, just in the fall or winter when he couldn't do anything at the farm. And he would work all week, and then he'd come home on weekends. And when he'd come home, he always had a bunch of quarters, and he'd give us each a quarter. And we had an old, what we call a heaterola stove in the front room of the house, and it had little holes around the top of it, and you could put quarters in those holes. It just fit. And us kids used to just live for the day or the time that he'd get home, and he'd give us these quarters, and we'd get up there up the side of that stove and put quarters around the top of that stove in those holes.
Simple days. If your mother and father had a message for their posterity, what do you think it would be?
Try to be honest, and of course they emphasize the church strongly, to keep and have a testimony of the gospel, but to be honest with friends. And like I mentioned earlier, Dad had so many friends. Everybody liked him, and he would give his shirt for somebody if he needed to. And he was noted in his funeral and in his life, during his life, for going in and helping people. If somebody had trouble, why, they'd call Dad, or he would know about it, hear about it. We didn't have a telephone, but he would hear about it and he'd go help if it was possible. But he was very well liked. He really was.
Sounds like a great man. Can you share with us how you met my grandma, and how did you know she was the one?
Now, what was that question?
How did you meet my grandma, Lucinda, and know she was the one?
Well, we were at school together, and she, oh, I don't know. She went off to, we were just friends. She went off to college when we graduated, or when she was a year ahead of me in school. And the year she graduated, she went off down to school down to Sanford. And there's a boy that she kind of liked the guy, and he asked her to marry him. So when she came home for the summer, I'd dated her a few times. When she came home for the summer, why, she was telling me about it. Because I had to change that, because I'd kind of fallen in love with her anyway. And so I talked her out of it. And of course, I was drafted into the Army a year later. And of course, she waited for me for 2 years. And we married May the 2nd. An anniversary coming up here. What is it, Saturday? May the 2nd. That'll be our, how many is it? About the 67th anniversary. I think it is. I'll have to figure that one out.
How would you describe her?
Oh, she was a hard worker and a good cook, and she was just a good provider for all the kids. And just a good lady. That's all I can say. In fact, her Jan's a lot like her. They're a lot like her.
Can you share a lesson you learned and a memorable experience while serving in the military?
Oh boy. Well, I was drafted one day after I graduated out of high school. They just drafted me and took me. That's what they do back in those days. When you become of age, 18 years old, you had to register. And as soon as you get out of school, which most of us boys were, why, they'd take us into the service. Well, the day after I got out of high school, I was drafted. They loaded me on a bus, hauled me to California. And Fort MacArthur, California, and then there they distributed it out. I went to camp, oh dear, I forget the camp I went to. I trained there for 6 months. Then at that time the war ended. Just as I finished my training, the war ended. And so they didn't know what to do with the soldiers because the war was over, and they didn't figure that they needed us any longer. So they gave us a choice. You either stay here and don't know when you're going to get out because we're not sure when we're going to discharge you, or we'll give you $2,000 and a 30-day furlough. But then you can, after that, you can pick your theater of war, and we'll take you to it for at least a year. And so I thought, well, what the heck? They're not going. I don't know when I'm going to get out, so I'll take a year, and I'll go to Germany because I had a brother, older brother, that was killed in Germany in the war, the Battle of the Bulge. So, and he was buried over there. So I thought, well, I'll do that. So they took me. I went to Germany, and I stayed there about 15, 16 months. And while I was there, I made 2 trips. I was fortunate. They put me in an office, and I worked in the office and took care of the books for the group that we were with. And my buddy drove the general. He was the chauffeur for the general. Of course, they had a car. And we talked to the general one time and asked him if we could borrow his car for a weekend and go to Belgium, where Dean was buried, in Henri-Chapelle, Belgium. And so he did. He let us take it. And we took 2 days and went to Belgium and saw Dean's grave. I have pictures of it.
No.
And so that was quite an experience.
That's great.
Well, I had a lot of good experiences in the Army, or I guess mostly it's a different life. The men don't care, all they think about's women, and they'll do anything to be with them. And that was the bad thing that I had to get away from, get out. I was privileged. I went to Switzerland. I spent about a weekend in Switzerland, in Geneva. That's a good country. And of all of the countries that I went through in Europe, Switzerland is more like the United States than any of the others. How do you feel about that?
Yeah, probably.
That's my feeling.
Yeah, it's a beautiful country.
But I went down there, had a good visit. I got into Belgium, Switzerland.
What about your trip home?
Well, I guess to finish it off,
Yeah.
coming home from Europe, we loaded up in Bremerhaven, Germany, in an old ship, and we was coming down the English Channel and hit a mine that had been floating out there probably for years, and it knocked a hole in the side of our ship. Of course, it was taking on water, and a ship is made in compartments, so they sealed off the compartment. We made it back to Belgium, or to Germany, and traded us, put us in another ship, and we got out in the middle of the Atlantic, and the boilers blew up. And so we had to literally drift with the wind into
Azor.
where is it?
Azor.
The Azore Islands.
Wow.
They're out in the middle of the Atlantic. And we drifted in there. It took us about 30 some odd days to do that by the time they picked us up. And once a day, we run out of food waiting for that. The ship ran out of food, and we had quite a few civilians that were coming home after the war that was over there, and they would feed them better than they'd do the soldiers. And some of those old rugged soldiers, they wouldn't take that. They threw the chef overboard, right out into the ocean. Of course, they threw a raft out so he could get on it, and then pulled him in. But they got his attention. But anyway, it took us. Then we went. The ship. I think we was probably about 15 days. Then a ship come out of the United States and picked us up and took it and brought us to the United States. Then because we've been so long, the first night in Germany when I waited for that other ship to come and get us, we slept in just a great big hangar, aircraft hangar, and they just beds all through it. And I went to bed with my clothes on, just a regular uniform, and I had my duffel bag it was, I had it locked to the head of my bed, and while I was sleeping, somebody cut that strap and stole my clothes and everything I had in it. While I was in Switzerland, I bought 2 or 3 watches over there. They were cheaper and good watches. And when they would, I don't know whether they knew that's what they were, that they were there or what it was, but I asked the commanding officer, because of that, if I could stay over and catch the next ship out, which another one was coming. And he said yes, so I stayed, and I looked all through it, and I couldn't find my bag. I don't know what they had done, but anyway, I slept in that uniform, or I wore that uniform for about 20 days, and that's all I wore. The only thing that I could, of course, at night I'd take my underwear off and wash them, and set them out on by my bed. Of course, I'd have to sleep in the nude, and they would dry, and then of course I'd put those back on. But that uniform was pretty dirty until I got to church, or to St. John, or to
Back
well,
home.
to the time I got back to St. John's.
Family probably didn't want to give you a hug after coming home. You smell so bad, right?
Well, I don't. They didn't know that, so I don't know that. It probably looked pretty dirty.
So how did you choose your career? What was your favorite part about it?
I don't know. I always decided I'd like to be a farmer. So when I got home, the government, or soldiers, they would pay your schooling for 4 years after you got out of the service. So I decided that Lamel and Henry, Lamel, my sister, they were going to school in Logan, Utah. And so I decided, well, I'd go to school with them. And of course, they offered a ride. Henry had a car, and they offered a ride, so they took Grandma and I were up there, and we found a place to live close by the school. And for 2 years, the second year when we'd go home in the summer, the second year when we got back, or no, it was Christmas time, we'd go home for Christmas. And when we come back to Utah after Christmas, the neighbor who was living right next to us, it was in kind of an apartment, and we had a door between us, and a mother and her daughter, the daughter was going to school, was the next door, and they weren't going to go anyplace, so we asked them to open the door during the day and keep our part of the apartment warm so it wouldn't freeze. Well, I don't know what happened, but when we got back to school after our vacation, we couldn't get the doors open because the pipes had frozen in the apartment. There was about 2 to 3 inches of ice all through the floor, all over the floor. And by then I had a car. So we just loaded up the car and picked up Darwin, he was your dad, he was a baby. Loaded him in it and drove back to Tempe.
How was that?
Went to school in Tempe.
That's ASU.
Yeah.
Interesting. What were you studying at that time?
Agriculture.
Agriculture. Did you finish a degree?
I didn't get my degree. Ardith kind of talked me out of, well, he didn't talk me out of it, but he wanted me to help him, and he was in the trucking business. And so I just kind of drifted out and got out of it. And I studied, while in college, I studied soils. And when I got out of, away from Earl, or Ardith, a guy by the name of Lacey Greer, who was a good friend of he found that out, and so he was an engineer with the highway department, and he hired me with the highway department to test the soils. I tested the soils from the New Mexico line to Winslow, Arizona on I-40. Every bit of that soil on that roadway I tested, and it had to be a certain size, and it would compact to 100% and so on and so forth. I had to make sure it did that. So I worked for the highway department for 16 years with the engineers. Then a fellow by the name of Leroy Gibbons found out that the Mobil Oil distributorship was going to be vacant, and they wanted to sell it in Winslow. And they wanted to move it to Holbrook, and Mobil Oil already had bulk tanks there in Holbrook, and so I bought it. Leroy helped me. Well, he said he'd help me, but I went to the bank and borrowed the money and bought that distributorship. And that's what I had until, what was it about? Well, I guess I had it until I moved to Phoenix, or to Mesa.
And that was just the gas station there.
At that time, by then I had pretty well sold everything in it. And I never did own that bulk plant, so I didn't worry about that. They just shut it down. I don't know what they did with it, actually.
What about trials? What were some of the hardest trials in your life? What did you learn?
Probably when my father was killed, that was a real trial, because we knew what Mother was going to have to go through. And that was probably my biggest trial.
What do you think you learned from that experience?
That I had to work and take care of her, or help take care of her, rather.
Yeah. How did you meet Jan?
I've known Jan all of her life. I guess you know she and I are first cousins. Mm-hmm. And I used to go over to her home, or where she lived. She has a brother just older than I am, just about a year older. And I used to go over and stay with him. And Jan used to just tag us around. She would, wherever we'd go, she'd follow us. And one time we did it, and I'd been out hoeing corn, and we'd all sweaty and dirty, and we'd gone into the house. We went by a stock tank where the cattle drink, and it was just about full of water. And they're cleared, it was clear, clean water. So Ted and I wanted to just jump in that, birthday suit and all, and wash off before we went home. We couldn't get rid of her. But I've known Jan all her life, in fact.
That's great. What do you think is the key to a successful marriage?
To be in love and to respect each other's wishes,
Patience.
hopes,
And patience.
patience.
He's patient, I'm not.
How did you guys decide to go on a mission, and can you share any positive experiences you had while serving a mission?
After we were married, of course, both of us wanted to go on a mission, and her husband died just 1 month after Lucinda died, after your grandma died. And so, actually, I was going to the singles home evening on Monday night, which we have over here in this building. And I was in charge of the program this one night, and I asked Earl, he happened to be in town, I asked him if he'd come over and talk and to tell him about patriarchal blessings. And so he had volunteered to do it, and so he came over and he was visiting with Jan, and Jan says, I hate to be a widow. And Earl approached me after that and he says, Lamar, why don't you do something about that? So I did.
You had to ask me.
I decided, well, now how am I going to start this? So I invited her to we'll pick a date, and we'll go to Taylor where her husband is buried, and then I'll go to St. John's where her grandma was buried, and we'll get to see those two and do it in a day, you know. And so we decided to go one day, and we went that trip. It was quite a nice trip. And it what?
We went to see Ted.
Oh, and she has her brother Ted that I talked about earlier, and we, of course, we got to see him. So we dated on the quiet. Nobody knew that we were dating. And all of a sudden I decided, well, I'm going to pop the question. She wouldn't give me an answer. I think I have to ask her about 4 times before she'd finally say yes. But it's been a real good relationship, because, you know, we'd have been alone otherwise. And after we married, we both, with our previous spouses, talked about going on a mission. So we decided, well, why don't we? So we put in our papers, and they called us about, I think they gave us a week to get ready. We didn't even have to stop in church. And we drove up Salt Lake, and that's where our mission was, right there in Salt Lake.
Is there a specific experience you can recall from serving?
That's what was the experience that you can remember?
Well, President Elder Perry.
Elder L. Tom Perry, he was quite a guy, and I always, with my wives, when we're walking down the sidewalk, I always put them in the center, and off of the street. And we were walking down. When we lived or first moved up to Salt Lake, we lived in a dormitory, and it was only about a block and a half to the temple where we served, or to the Joseph Smith building. And we were walking, and we changed sides. And as we changed sides, I changed to the outside, and she came to the inside. Elder Perry walked up behind us, and he just laughed as loud he did, and he had a boisterous laugh. He says, "I haven't seen that in years." Anyway, he congratulated us on that, and then we had 2 or 3 good experiences with L. Tom Perry. One time we met him at the door going into where our office was. He got there just before we did, so he pulled the door open and insisted. We wanted him to go in first, and he wouldn't do it. He insisted that we go in first. But we had some good ones, and we were with, one time we were having a meeting with all of the missionaries and the committee for the indexing for the church, or up there. And who was it?
Brother Scott.
Oh, Elder Scott. He's related to us. His wife was a farmer.
Okay.
And he's related to us. And he was there with the committee chairs. And afterwards, I thought, well, we were sitting right down in the front, and they had called on me to offer the closing prayer after the meeting. I got up, gave the prayer, and then I thought, well, I'm just going to go meet him. And so everybody was shaking his hand, and when everybody kind of moved away, well, I walked up and I says, you're related to you through your wife. And he grabbed me and just almost smothered me. He was so glad to see me. It was really a great experience. He says, now, where's your wife? Jan was standing down there waiting for me. And my niece, Lamel's daughter, was with us. She was on the mission with us there. And she was there, so they came over and I introduced them to him. And that was a good experience. And during the noon hour, we would go across underneath the building, the Joseph Smith building, in the basement where the cars were parked. And we crossed over that into the cafeteria and eat lunch. And every Wednesday, the brethren had been into the temple to a meeting. They meet every Wednesday, and they'd be coming down the sidewalk underneath there. And of course, if we'd see them, they'd speak to us. The prophet, quite often, he'd come by and wave to us. And it was a good experience.
That's great. What are some words that best describe who you've tried to be in life and how you'd like to be remembered?
Oh, my heavens. As a good man, honest and trustworthy. I hope that I would be liked by all my family, especially.
What are you most proud of in life?
My family, probably. I think my family, and that I've tried to live my religion. I was a bishop for 7.5 years. I was in the bishopric for 10 years before that. So I served in the bishopric and as a bishop for 17.5 years. And that was a great experience. It really was a great experience. I think that's probably one of the best experiences I've had in my life, was to be in that position. I think I was well liked as a bishop. There's a lot of the things that the members of the ward would come to me after they made me bishop and wanted to talk because they couldn't talk to the previous bishop. They didn't feel good about it, but they felt good about talking to me. And I was quite proud about that. I felt good about that. I hope I gave some good instructions to those that needed it.
Mm-hmm.
And I had quite a few that really needed for repentance because they had sinned, and some of them were quite bad, and they came to me, as they should, as a bishop, and confessed. And that was a good experience.
What are some of the most positive moments of your life? Maybe you just answered that, but...
Well, probably when we found that money and gave it to Mother. That was a good feeling. It really was, because actually our prayers had been answered. Now I can tell you 2 other instances where the Holy Ghost has literally saved my life. I was coming back. Lucinda and I and Ardith and Gus had gone to Detroit, Michigan, and bought a brand new truck and trailer, and we brought it home. And I went to Phoenix to get a load of hay, and I was coming, or not, well, but this time we didn't have hay. We took that new truck, brand new truck, and went down, and I picked up 20 ton of commercial fertilizer in sacks, and I was bringing them back to St. John's. And up on the hill there, just before you come into where the graveyard is, as you go into Miami, on the other side there, I stopped there and checked my brakes, and everything was fine. And I got back in my truck and started down into Miami, and it's almost 5 miles from there into Miami. I lost my brakes. The compressor quit. Actually, the fan belt busted, and I could not do anything about it. And I started praying, and all the way off that mountain, I met one truck, and that is all. And that truck knew what had happened, and he turned around and followed me down. As we come to, just before we come into Miami, you don't remember it, but there used to be a real bad curve as you entered, and you went around into the main part of the city, and it would have been impossible for me to do. I was doing 80 miles an hour. I come around that corner as you enter into Miami, and the Lord spoke to me, or the Holy Ghost spoke to me, and says, "Lamar, go up the hill." And I looked up there, and there's a road right up the side of that hill. I flipped my load off, and it was on a flatbed. I just lost it all down the middle of the road. That's the most fertile part in the world, with all that commercial fertilizer, and rolled up the side of that hill and hit the bank and stopped the truck. That is, well, literally, I would be here today if it hadn't been the Lord, the Holy Ghost saving my life. Another time I was working for the Greer brothers in their ranch when I think I was probably about 15 or 16. And one morning we I saddled the horse. I'd been out to their farm, and we saddled the horse and put him in a trailer and hauled him to the ranch. And I was going to bring a cow and a calf back to town. It was probably about 7 miles. And I was coming down the lane with this cow and the calf, and just, not much going on. And the Holy Ghost spoke to me. He says, "Lamar, go in the gate." And I turned and wondered what it was behind me. And I looked up ahead of the horse, and there was a gate. It was out of the lane that I would have been going through if I just stayed right on with it. I kicked the horse, and we loped up in front of the cow and opened that gate, and I took her through that gate. And then we went another way back to the rest of the farm where I was to bring that cow. There again, and when I got home, Mother was on her knees praying, because there had been an escaped convict out of the jail, and he was out in that area, and she heard about it over the radio. And so she was worried about me. And that when I walked in the house, she was on her knees praying about me. But those are 3 experiences that I've actually had as far as the Lord intervening, the Holy Ghost intervening with my life. I guess literally saving it.
That's incredible. 2 more questions here. What are you most thankful for in this life?
For a good family, for 2 good wives. I'm thankful. I've had pretty good health throughout my life. However, I do have, well, they claim I have kidney problems now, but they don't give me any trouble. And I do have pre-diabetes, but that don't give me any trouble. So I just take my medicine and go through life. But I have felt, 88 years old, I've outlived all of my brothers and sisters. And so I feel real fortunate. Right now, as far as I know, I'm in pretty good health.
You look great. So, last question here, and we can wrap it up with anything else that you want to talk about, but what message would you like to share with your posterity?
To be faithful with their church responsibilities, whatever they're called to do, to put forth their best effort. That's one of the most important things in our life, is the gospel of Jesus Christ. And I think that's to try to be truthful and faithful and diligent in our responsibilities, in our callings, and whatever they are. I think that's probably one of the main things. And of course, try to be honorable to your family. I believe that's not all, but that's some of the main things.
It's a big question just to ask someone, right? Right on the spot. That's a great answer. Thank